Welcome to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. The WNBA has entered its 27th season on the heels of a record-breaking NCAA college championship season and consistent Olympic dominance by the women's team. WNBA players are seeking to match that growth through policy to keep the league and their futures secure. The salaries have slowly improved through collective bargaining, but often at the expense of jobs, as caps and other clauses limit how all players can reap the benefits. The league is at a crossroads, where players are receiving a shrinking amount as a percentage of league revenue, pointing to the inevitable opt-out of the current CBA. We will examine what changes could best serve the future of the league for its growth with two WNBA experts, Costabile, Chicago Sun-Times WNBA writer who's also on the beat for the Chicago Sky, and Maggie Hendricks, national writer for Bally Sports and contributor to all things WNBA. Let's get to class. The WNBA, or the Women's National Basketball Association, began play in 1997, capturing the high from two critical movements in women's basketball. The UConn Huskies in 1995 had completed the perfect season, 35-0, en route to a national championship. The other was the incredible gold medal run of the 1996 USA women's basketball team that featured legacy stars from top to bottom. The WNBA would gain the financial support it needed through backing by the NBA. It began with 8 teams. In the East were Charlotte, Cleveland, New York, and Houston. In the West were Los Angeles, Phoenix, Sacramento, and Utah. Today, there are 12 teams. During a 3-year period between 2000 and 2002, the league grew to 16 teams, which remains the highest total in the league's 26-year history. With expansion and later contraction, it underscores how the league grapples with growth, not only the right amount of it, but the pace that best preserves its sustainability. As is true with many professional sports leagues, the story of this league can be told through its players. WNBA players have fought through their Players Association to improve the rights and salaries of the players. Most consequential to these collective bargaining negotiations have been the fight over roster sizes, salaries, and caps on them. Star players like Diana Taurasi or Breanna Stewart have challenged the extreme application of rules that hinder their ability to maximize their value and income. Taurasi sat out the 2015 WNBA season in exchange for a salary-level bonus from her international team to do so. Stewart, who was injured while playing overseas, was a catalyst for conversation around the lack of time off for WNBA players who earn a second living abroad. 5 years ago, 90 of the 144 players played overseas. Last season, it dropped to 67, in part because of the pressure for players after Brittany Griner's detention in Russia, where she was making a robust $1 million a year, well above her WNBA salary. As a result of Stewart's circumstance, free agency became a hot-button topic. The players receiving the core designation used to be controlled for 5 years. Now it is 2. Collective gains in the labor process have had counteractions by ownership that may show incremental growth from one angle, like improved minimum or maximum salaries, or from another, it stifles the number of player jobs. This became clearer in recent history with the number of top draft picks who failed to even make the team. First-round picks even. The number 1 pick in the draft in 2021 was Charlie Collier, who was later cut by Dallas. Number 1 overall picks are not even sure things under such a system. As important as a simple expansion, a structure of development would provide a pathway of sustainability for more players. Still in a pot that is too small to capture all of the available talent. Gains in player income are on one side of a seesaw, with jobs on the other side. Balance is sought, but not until sustainable growth is powering it. We are very fortunate to be joined by our next esteemed guest. We have Maggie Hendricks, a national sports writer with Bally Sports and covers all things WNBA, and Costabile, a Chicago Sun-Times sports writer who focuses in on the WNBA and the Chicago Sky beat. All right, Maggie, let me start with you. I'm looking at so much that's been happening, the draft, the league in full force right now, and so many changes in collective bargaining. I guess what moment do you think we're facing right now existentially when it comes to the WNBA in terms of where this league is trying to go and where it's going?
We're starting to see a level of interest and sustained and growing interest, but there are things that need to be invested in and fixed and worked on to make sure that interest continues to grow. So it's a really important time and one the WNBA could definitely seize.
Well, and you see this from the Chicago Sky point of view as well, on the ground with this particular team and organization. I mean, what do you see, in the specific local sensibility around this pivotal moment?
Yeah, it's so interesting when you put it into like that local perspective, because us three know very well how difficult it is to establish yourself in Chicago's sports market. Chicago sports fans are brutal at times, and the Sky came into the league as an independent franchise, and really for its existence has worked so hard to find its footing in this sports landscape. And now we're talking about a team that has a championship, that had, a Hall of Famer in Candace Parker come in free agency, decide on her own will she wanted to play here. So when you think about where the franchise started, I think that really puts into perspective how pivotal this moment is and how much growth has happened, but also how much growth has to continue to happen.
Well, and to the national, perspective, we noticed the tremendous success through the NCAA tournament, the women's game, garnering so much attention. South Carolina, dominant teams, Iowa, LSU winning it all. And yet sometimes you're trying to figure out that connection between this top tier talent and that visibility to how that sort of graduates to the WNBA. What do you think should be captured or can be captured in this moment with respect to that popularity?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fans out there who became fans because of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and Aaliyah Boston. And so I do think that the WNBA season being so quick after the college game does help bring some of those fans over. But of course, then when you see players get cut, who we did just watch in the NCAA tournament, that can definitely be like a stifle. It's a definite block for fans. And so, I think that there are things that need to be addressed from the bigger WNBA, but that there are those fans out there.
To Maggie's point around the draft, there's always this passion you have for players, and the top players in teams that you love in college. And then you say, oh, I can see them now here. But yet you're dealing with a market of 12 teams and this push up against roster challenges. We saw this tremendous depth in the champion Chicago Sky last season with, flirting with 7 players until they got the number on opening day. What do you see from that point of view around this challenge? Roster
spots are the issue, right? And it's an issue that players want to see addressed too, because it's not even from a standpoint of, oh, this incoming talent has nowhere to go. But when you look at the talent that's already on the team, they face injury, or even in practice, think about going 5-on-5. You need 10 players to do that. The Sky for almost 2 weeks had 8 available players. So as much as expansion is necessary, and we're talking about team expansion, so is roster expansion, because that's going to address the issues that we're seeing where this incoming talent doesn't have anywhere to go. And instead of having to go overseas and develop themselves, they can develop right here in the WNBA and also be an asset to the stars that are already making up the WNBA. That I can't reiterate it enough. Having the bodies in practice is so valuable. Like it's kind of insane to think that you can't even run 5-on-5 with your own team at times during the season.
Well, I think honestly, the first thing that needs to be addressed and can be addressed quickly is that the salary cap is the first thing that needs to be expanded, because most of the teams, you will hear again and again in WNBA marketing that it's about the 144 players, but it's not actually 144, because a lot of teams, most teams only carry 11 players because they have a hard salary cap, and that hard salary cap, often most of it goes to their top talent. And, that's the way it is in sports.
We continue our exploration into the growth of the WNBA and dive into how Brittany Griner's detention has changed the playing field for all players. Next on Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health, and our discussion on the growth challenges facing the WNBA. You mentioned salaries and minimums going up, but as budgets and ownership may do, they kind of flip it against you a little bit. They may flip it against you and say, well, okay, now here's here's our budget. So, great, you're making more per player, but now you have less jobs, so to speak. So can you speak to some of I'll start with you, Ann, about the notable gains through collective bargaining, and I guess the opportunity in 2024 where the CBA, there's an opt-out opportunity for the players to kind of think about, okay, now we may push for this. So what do you see, Annie, on that landscape?
So obviously the salary increases were huge gains, but to me, when I look at the CBA, one of the most notable gains was the protection for mothers and the stipends afforded to mothers and the housing changes afforded to mothers and the maternity leave that was afforded to mothers. Like when you think about these protections, they're basic, right? And it's 2023 and we're still celebrating them in this way of like, yay, we got this. And then when you think about the opt-out, I think a lot of it is going to hinge on this upcoming media contract, which expires in 2025. And so that I think is going to be pivotal and really impacting the players' decisions to seek that opt-out, because they know they've seen their value increase. They've seen the interest increase. They know what they're worth. And so when you think about that, what's going to happen with that media deal, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer that the opt-out is going to happen.
Well, I don't think prioritization is absolutely settled. And that's the thing where players have to arrive and have to prioritize the WNBA over their overseas team. I don't think that's over because the European players are not happy about prioritization. And they've even lost a couple really good players who I'm not sure are coming back. But I think that the thing that we're going to hear a lot about, and especially in light of the new upcoming media deal, is these players want the same percentages that their NBA counterparts are getting of revenue. And so you look at the NBA deals, I believe that number that the players get is around 48 or 49%. In the WNBA, it's around 5%. So they want more of a percentage. They're not saying, pay me like LeBron James. They're saying, pay me the same percentage that LeBron James is getting.
Yeah, and one point I dug up when I was checking this out here, I was just looking it up now. So if you take the 27th season of the NBA, the player revenue share was about 50%, to your point. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was making $350,000. So even when they throw the comparison out there about, okay, revenue for NBA, WNBA, as you talk about percentages, there's a clear disparity there. And I guess one point along those lines is, Brittany Griner, for example. He talked about protecting this, this roster. Players are playing overseas. So Ann, let me start with you. Like, can you talk about this sort of protection to make it a little more challenging for experienced players to come back and play overseas?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it from the owner's standpoint, prioritization was this rule that they wanted to implement to ensure that the league's brightest stars, the players that they're paying the most money, were in market for game one of the season, right? When you think about it in that way, okay, that makes sense. But when you're comparing the dollar amounts and what you're asking them to give up, it was a heavy hit for a lot of players. Like a lot of players, I think, took that personally. I know they did, from speaking to players over the last couple of years. Prioritization has been a huge pill to swallow. But then you look at players like you mentioned, Brittany Griner, also Courtney Vandersloot, Brianna Stewart, like they're not going to give up the money that they're making overseas if it's not going to be matched here. They're not going to do that.
And if I could add one thing to Annie's point, it's not even just about the money, though obviously that's a big thing. They only play 40 to 45, I think is the max, games in the WNBA. Those players do not think that they can, and I agree with them, that they can get enough experience playing and getting better and being the kind of players that the league wants them to be, which is 40 to 45 games a year. They want more games is what is another part of it. They want more experience.
Like The league, when it was established by David Stern, it was established with the intent that players could play overseas. They wanted it to be a summer league so that players could play year round. So now to be in this position where that's no longer beneficial for the league is, again, that's not sitting well with them.
So I guess I wonder with Stewart as an example, and I believe Maggie, you wrote an article about Courtney Vandersloot in this regard, 2020. Now these two kind of chose their home, right, in free agency. They're like, okay, it's sort of like, taking their talents to the Liberty, so to speak, right? And Sloot was over at the Sky forever. So I'm curious about free agency. I was curious about what you saw the impact of free agency and the ability to kind of individually choose after you finally get the right to do so. I'll start with you, Maggie.
I mean, it's been huge. When I first started covering the league in 2019, free agency was not really much of a thing at all. It was everybody basically stayed where they were. There were some trades basically when players really, really pushed for them, but that was it. And so now we're seeing players have control and wanting to go play with certain people. And that was really what's happened in New York is that Brianna Stewart wanted to play in the W with Jonquel Jones and Courtney Vandersloot. And she is truly the one who engineered the move with Sloot. She is the one who pushed her over because they did play together overseas. They know each other quite well. They know that how they play together. So they wanted to play together to win a WNBA championship. And so that is how that happened in New York. So I think the free agency has been great because I will tell you, when I first started covering the league, we weren't talking about the WNBA in February. The last few years, we have been talking about nothing but the WNBA in February.
We'll be right back on Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. We're at sort of this turning point. And look, the ownership as part of it in these negotiations that work, with and sometimes in conflict with players to try to find the ultimate collective bargaining result, now are a little bit more independent. Over half the teams now are kind of outside that NBA umbrella. So I was curious about what that meant in terms of the shift in ownership that aren't necessarily franchises of WNBA teams, so to speak.
Yeah, I love this question because for so long, the WNBA teams that were partnered with an NBA team or were under the same ownership were in a way deemed like at a higher tier because of the luxuries of being associated with the NBA team. Maybe it meant you're sharing their practice facility or you have some of the same benefits that they have. But now we're seeing these teams that are individually owned stepping up to elevate their brand. And that's what I think is going to be so special is like, especially when you consider a team like the Sky, right? The Chicago Bulls are an iconic franchise, a global franchise. You go into any airport anywhere and you're going to see people in Bulls gear, hats, t-shirts, whatever. And they've been this mediocre team since Jordan was here, right? Well, you think about what it would have meant for the Bulls franchise to have a WNBA team. I mean, the possibilities really are endless. Your mind could really run wild with what it could have been. But now we're seeing the Sky really take hold of their brand, and it's taken them a long time, right? We're talking about them investing in their own practice facility. They've added to their ownership group. There's interest from others in their ownership group. So it's really going to be special, I think, to see the way that these individually owned franchises develop.
And Maggie, what do you see? And I guess from there, what do you think is next, the sort of next steps, next iteration of the league?
I think we're going to continue to see the growth in ownership in the way the Sky that just did it, the way the Seattle Storm raised extra money to build their practice facility, in bringing in owners who maybe don't own the whole franchise, but bringing in owners for a 1%, 2% stake, where they don't have to come up with as much capital, but their connections and their experience in the industry or experience with working with women and elevating women, that's going to be as valuable as the money that they bring in. And I feel like that's where we're going with ownership. So the Storm and the Aces are really showing what you can do. You go to a Seattle game, there are 19,000 people filling the Climate Pledge Arena, screaming their heads off. And the Sonics haven't been there since the early 2000s. So they, Seattle has shown really well how you can support a WNBA team without having an NBA team attached. And now Vegas is just walking right in their footsteps.
Yeah, I agree with Maggie's point completely, in that it is going to be this added investment, like she said, where maybe it's not someone buying, investing 1%, like she mentioned. And, we're talking about this when talking about the Sky, and you think about the investors that joined this group and the interest from others. These are names that are going to bring value, added attention, added expertise to the franchise.
Well, Maggie and I really appreciate your time here and enlightening us here on Classes in Session. It's tremendous. I've been a big fan for a long time. I was watching Final Fours back in the 80s and, Penny Toller and all. So I go back to Long Beach State and La Tech and all that. So it's been such a joy to talk with you and gain so much insight. So we're all considerably more educated on this history and also this present. And obviously we're all here rooting for tremendous success for the league and beyond. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
The WNBA is at a critical juncture in its history. The players have always fought for change, both big and incremental, not only for better policy and regulations for the game, but as a voice for communities outside of the arena. The last time the league expanded was in 2008, and today the star talent we have come to watch and enjoy at the college level are having trouble finding roster spots in the WNBA. Expansion has been called out, but there's also a need to develop and retain talent. Talents have therefore had to go abroad to stay sharp, but also to earn more money overseas. A catch-22 for the league that wants to encourage domestic and local growth without offering enough gameplay or pay to keep that talent here year-round. The potential is in full view. Strong college game, exciting players, just not enough room to develop. This will all be collectively bargained again soon. Until then, we can count on the players to continue the fight on every inch of the court, as they always have. I'm Doug Glanville. See you next time.